Flight delays and cancellations are uncomfortably high right now. In fact, the on-time arrivals rate thus far in 2022 hasn't been this bad since 2014, according to Bureau of Transportation Statistics data. I've got some tricks to tell you how to book a flight that's less likely to be canceled. But before we do, let me tell you just how bad it is. For the period between January and April 2022, just 76% of nonstop domestic flights arrived on time, according to the BTS. Meanwhile, about 20% of flights were delayed, which is a stat that, again, hasn't been this bad since 2014. What's even worse, 4% of flights were canceled completely. Compare this year's pitiful 76% on-time arrivals rate with a far better 87% on-time arrivals rate for the same period last year in 2021. Given that only about 3/4 of flights arrive on time, your odds are not exactly good. Luckily, I've got some tricks up my sleeve to help. Now, I will preface this by saying that this is not a guarantee. You could follow all of these tricks and your flight still could be canceled or delayed, but this is a good way to at least reduce those odds. So before we go into those things, I want to kind of talk about why flights are actually being delayed. And one of the biggest is staffing delays. This can be airline staffing delays, so that could be a shortage of pilots and flight attendants, but also so many other people who go into your flight getting off the ground. That could be the person who loads bags or who packs the food that actually fills the plane. The Federal Aviation Administration is also experiencing staffing issues, meaning the FAA can't hire and train new air traffic controllers quickly enough. National aviation system delays, such as heavy traffic volume or air traffic control challenges, account for about 5% of delays. Second is weather. Now, while weather feels like a big reason for delays, it's actually not that common. Weather accounts for less than 1% of delays. But another big reason for delays is increasing travel demand. Now, a lot of people don't realize the same aircraft actually flies 2, 3, sometimes 4 flights in one day. That's because demand is really high right now. Back in 2020 or 2021, when the demand just wasn't there, an aircraft might only fly 1 or 2 flights a day. Now, if one of those flights is delayed, there's a big buffer window until that second flight. But if an aircraft has to fly 3 or 4 flights, then there's not really that buffer window, which means that a delay on one flight just has that domino effect on all the other ones. So with that, let me tell you how to book a flight that's unlikely to be delayed or canceled. Now, this first tip might be obvious, but I want you to book with an airline that already has a solid track record. Now, NerdWallet analyzed on-time arrivals rates by airline, and here's what we found. NerdWallet's analysis is based on BTS arrival data between January and April 2022 for the 10 largest US airlines by passenger miles. If timeliness is a priority, consider booking Delta or Hawaiian, which arrived on time 82% of the time. Skip JetBlue, which only landed on schedule 60% of the time. Number 2, book the earliest flight in the day. Late arrivals from incoming aircraft account for 7% of flight delays. Now, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but it's not uncommon for one single aircraft to fly multiple flights per day. So if the last flight was delayed, then it inevitably means that your next flight is going to be delayed. If you want to sort of avoid that snowball effect, here's your trick. Book the first flight out in the day, and then you avoid any situation where you are delayed by incoming aircraft. Number 3, avoid layovers. Now, I realize that this isn't possible for everyone, especially because a flight with a layover can often be a lot cheaper, and sometimes it's the only way to get where you're trying to go, especially if you're coming from or going to a smaller city. But that said, layovers can potentially double your risk of a delay because now there are 2 flights that you have to take. And it doesn't do much good if your first flight was on time, and then now your second flight is delayed, you are twiddling your thumbs in the airport. And almost worse is if your first flight was delayed and your second flight was on time, but the layover window was short. Now you've just missed that second flight. That's a big reason why I try to avoid layovers completely. However, I do have some tips if you have to do a layover, and my best piece of advice is to book directly with the airline. Now, if you are booking one leg on one airline and you are booking another leg on another airline, then the airlines probably won't help you if one of them is delayed. If you book the entire leg all on the same airline, then they're more likely to rebook you on a different flight so you can still get where you're trying to go even if it's late. Now, my fourth and final piece of advice is to choose an airline that offers multiple flights on the same route on the same day. Now, this is pretty common. You might think of a big airline, maybe United. Let's say they fly 6 flights a day from San Francisco to Las Vegas. If your particular flight gets canceled, that can certainly be annoying, but it's not a big deal. You just catch the next flight out. It's very likely that United will book you on that next flight, so you might be maybe an hour or two late for your trip, but at the end of the day, it's not a big deal. Where it gets rough is if you book an airline that only has 1 flight a day. Now that 1 flight has been canceled. Now they might rebook you on their next flight, but that flight is happening tomorrow, in which case you are already 1 day late to your vacation. I give you my 4 best tips for how to book a flight that's unlikely to be canceled, but the reality is you're probably gonna face a flight cancellation or at least a delay at some point in your life. Given that's the case, I always encourage you to pack something really important, and that's your patience. If anything, pack some extra snacks for the airport, something to do. I actually really love having lounge access, which I get through many premium travel credit cards to keep me entertained and fed while I have to stay at the airport through a delay. Now, there's one more thing that I want you to know, and that is if your flight is canceled outright, you are entitled to full compensation. That compensation comes from the airline, and it's regardless of the reason, regardless of the fare class. Many airlines won't actually tell you this, so make sure you know your rights so you can get that money back in the event of a full flight cancellation. I'm Sally French, a travel writer at NerdWallet. I'm totally a morning person, so I don't mind booking the first flight out, but if you are not a morning person, become one for your vacation. If you like this video, please make sure to like and subscribe.